Okay, we are ready to begin. Welcome again to another Tuesday night marathon at the Mechanics Institute in San Francisco. This has been going on for about 48 or 49 years now. The exact number is online in our history, but starting another 8-rounder here. Our lecture tonight, we're going to start off with the Moscow Grand Prix that's helping to choose candidates for the World Championship. And that'll be about a year from now, 8 players that play for the right to play Magnus. And these Grand Prix tournaments, there's 4 of them, 24 players that they each try to win these events, get a certain number of points. The top 2 out of those 4 tournaments, they get in the candidate, along with 2 by rating, 2 from the World Cup, the Challenger, and one of the sponsors' recommendations. We also have some MI chess players from around the world. There's Mark Pinto, who's now in the north of Iceland playing a tournament. He had his first round today. Our Blitz tournament director, Jules Jelinek, is in Switzerland. And, well, he's not really playing chess. He's just touring. And we have Magnus, who has been playing around the world. He played in the Ivory Coast tournament. He played in a distillery in Scotland. And who else I thought was in Scotland, but he's fortunately back now, is Mike Baer. And wasn't quite playing chess. He was looking for dinosaur prints, I guess, trying to track the live ones. You can see the size of that and the foot. And so you can ask Mike more about that tonight if you like. But, and of course, we had the senior championship. It was 9 days ago, yes. And who won? The under 1600 section, Sami Agdamag, who you all see in the club. And of course, the open section champion, your one and only Elliot Winslow. But we're going to start with the best game in the last couple of weeks, a powerful performance by Alexander Grishuk, who's been a perennial candidate. He played 9 years ago, reached the finals. He's always sort of near the top, but he's never broken through. And right now, he's in the finals of the Moscow Grand Prix. He's tied with Nepomniachtchi. They've drawn their 2 games in the mini match, and tomorrow they're going into the Rapid and the Blitz afterwards to get a clear winner. But in the semifinals, our US champion, Hikaru Nakamura, was paired up with Grishuk. And I know they've had a lot of battles throughout the ages, the Olympic team, various big tournaments. But they drew the first game, and second game, Grishuk had the white pieces, with Hikaru having the black. And it started out with a very classical kind of Queen's Gambit. And Grishuk decides to liven it up a bit with a Catalan, make it a bit imbalanced. Hikaru doesn't take, which is the open Catalan, at least not yet. I'm sorry, G3, black's move, Bishop E7, castles, all mainline theory, and now opens the game given this choice. So Grishuk simply tries to recapture the pawn, classic open Catalan. Hikaru guards it, not yet worried about the long diagonal because pawn can come to c6 or a knight to d5. So Grishuk loosens things up a bit on this side of the board. And he could take when black develops his pieces, such as bishop a6, but he adds some extra spice to it, trying to capture on c4 with the knight. Hikaru just blocks the long diagonal, and Grishuk takes this pawn, great spot for the knight, but it leaves the d4 pawn hanging, which Hikaru grabs. And Grishuk develops his pieces. He gets a bit of edge in development here. Bishop e3, queen to h5, but black is all castled, so the development's not going to end in a checkmate like in the Morphy games of the old time. And Grishuk and here Hikaru moves his knight, threatening the check on h2, threatening the bishop. And you think, extra pawn, these threats, the bishop pair, looks on first sight like it should be very nice for the black side. But Grishuk simply defends. He loses the bishop pair. But you take a look at it, and black's not developed. No attack against the king, but there's this queen side where white's going to play slowly and just try to take some squares. Now, here Hikaru solidifies the queen side. The knight jumps in, and you see the white knights, they're very active in the center. And Hikaru says, okay, you can win your pawn back. You know, take the pawn. I'm going to get my development. I have the bishop pair. And what makes the game very good is Grishuk is playing for more. A lot of these games in the Grand Prix, there's just two-game mini-matches. You see these players playing very solid, very safe, afraid to make a mistake in the classic games. But Grishuk declines taking the pawn. He ups the pressure and asks him, well, how exactly are you going to develop? So Hikaru brings the rook over. Good move. Just, well, okay, it's doing much more here than it is there. Guards the pawn. And then if you take the pawn, okay, you know, well, actually, that's not good at all. Knight takes, or bishop takes, bishop to b7. Well, you've ended up in a pin there. It's not good. And all the black pieces are coming out the sides. However, if you leave the pawn there, the black pieces are not developed. And so if you're just very calm, say, I'm a pawn down, but I don't care, you can give your opponent a lot of trouble. But Grishuk's not quite sure what to do. Nice development, but where do you go from there? So he attacks the queen. Hikaru retreats, trying to trade. Grishuk attacks it. Hikaru comes back. Grishuk attacks it. Hikaru comes back. He's happy to draw with black, go into the rapid playoffs and the blitz he loves so much. Attacks here. And then what do you do for white? Very good. Very good. You haven't seen the game. Well, that's exactly it. I was looking for a really aggressive move, you know, how to push forward, and you said it. King to g2. that's what you have to do in this position. You have to go slowly forward. You have to take squares one at a time. So excellent. King to g2, and
What are the rules? That's not a three-fold repetition?
it's a very good question. I had to check it myself. It was only twice.
It came from G2 the first time.
Yeah, it was twice where the bishop was on e4. It was that close, and I bet Nakamura thought, oh, he's just going to repeat one more time. Well, no, the opponent must claim the draw.
It was on F3 twice, too, right?
Yes, twice on F3, twice on E4, so a lot of repeating, but it has to be the same position 3 times.
But not in sequence. No.
Pardon?
But not in sequence, right. Not in sequence.
It doesn't matter if it's in sequence, no. But okay, nothing is here where it's not been, so no more draw. And then you get a question, well, what does black do exactly? And this is what makes this game so nice. You know, black sort of develop, black's up a pawn, the bishop pair, no real weaknesses, maybe this, but you could even lose it. But what do you do?
I think the rule has to move on A8.
Okay, yeah, that somehow has to get out. And maybe he should do that right away. In fact, one of the commenters suggested that. Well, sorry, in fact, that is what happened. You play like Hikaru. And do you want to try again to play Grishuk's move? It's what do you do with white in this position? Okay, we're done with trying to repeat. No draw, no draw. How do we go forward? And close. He did H4. Takes a little territory over there. And you're certainly not worried about giving up that one piece and all of these, you know, on the king side. And you're not worried about pawn to c5. I think you would jump into this square. And all these squares are getting very weak over there. If you take, you get this great passed pawn, the knight coming in. So Hikaru did what looks like a logical move, may not quite be best. He did pawn to g6, sort of covering the diagonals. And then with the next move, you get a feeling that white really is getting somewhere. So suggestion for white again? Okay, that is nice and aggressive. Okay, but we're going to use somebody besides our king. He's kind of done enough.
I think he has to open the column, the open column.
I'm looking at like knight to b5.
Okay, you are looking at tactics and things, and they're guarded for the moment. They looked a long time. Okay, well, a positional move, and maybe you'll get a feel. He did pawn to f4. And then I hope you feel, look, this queen is getting restricted. This king side's getting restricted. And now bishop to f3 will be more powerful. And maybe knight to g4 after that, coming in. But it's all very slow on the white side. What makes this good is you say, okay, pawn down, but no rush at all. You're giving black all these chances to do something, but there's nothing very positive for black. E5? Okay, I think that gets hit by bishop to f3 on the queen, and then the knight forks the queen and pawn. So it's just difficult for black to do something. He did queen to h6, and maybe now you could do pawn to e5. Ah, no, there's still knight to g4.
Was there a better move, or was that?
Well, it's hard to give really good advice, and it's not so bad for black. White's just a bit better here.
Was rook to d7 bad?
Rook to d7. Okay. Can I throw in this?
Then I take check.
Take what with check? The king's.
Oh, he moved.
Ah, sneaky. Sneaky. That was his move. Yeah, because now we're threatening the check. If rook takes the rook, we take check.
Well, then queen's can still play king f8.
Here.
Yeah, king f8 might work.
You could. Yes, it's maybe. I think the tactics are going to start to work in white's favor. This queen over here. So like if we go rook takes, knight takes, attack the knight, maybe threatening the bishop. I have a feeling this is going to work badly for black because that queen is there. Maybe some other tactics for white there. But material's even and things are hanging for the black side. So Nakamura said, all right, you know, I'm going to be very careful, but I'm not going to give you a breakthrough. I'll just hold my territory. If you can win your pawn back and we get an equal position, fine. And but Grishik finds a way to up the pressure. Rook a7, pawn to f4, pawn to g6. Sorry, queen to h6. He last did queen to h6, so there's no bishop to f3. And now Grishik. It's hard to break through on the king side. He plans to break through on the queen side. And you see black has the two bishops, but knights are quite good in this position. They get some very nice squares. At this point, maybe queen to f8. Nakamura was thinking, didn't really know what to do for a constructive move. Could do queen to g7. That's
Yeah, because if knight to c5, bishop takes, then you can take on b2. Probably.
All right, that was not suggested by any of the commentators. So, but I like the move. And that's probably better than what Nakamura did. If I go knight to c4,
Actually, relying on queen takes b2 is no good because the rook hangs on c7.
But the pawn on e2 is so much.
yeah, that's complicated. If I go knight to c5, not sure I'm threatening that much. Oh, poor.
I throw a rook c2 and then take on e7.
Sorry, Elliot, what line are you talking about?
He wanted to play knight to c5. He thought that knight c5
Take queen to B2.
Takes, queen takes. All right, we may be able to just move that rook. Yeah, because if queen takes b2, rook c2 attacks the queen. But we move the rook. Maybe. I think you've cashed in too early. Grishuk has been very patient, and maybe he would have offered to exchange the bishops just to give the knight some strong squares on the white squares. But queen g7 is probably so the knight could hop in. Nakamura tried to avoid that, but the knights came to strong squares anyway. He opened the diagonal, bishop checks, but once again offered to trade the white squared bishops. Sometimes you think you shouldn't trade your fianchettoed bishops, but the rule is don't look what you're trading off or giving up. Look at what's left. And here, if they trade these bishops, you see how powerful the knights are and the fact that this bishop is restrained so that white is coming in on all these squares on the queen side. The funny thing is the computer isn't so unhappy with the black position. I think any human would feel very uncomfortable with the black side because it's hard to coordinate your pieces. Nakamura decided to go back. And Grishuk takes his pawn back. Nakamura comes back with the queen. Still no immediate breakthrough. Grishuk retreats. And Nakamura just tries to trade down and lessen the pressure. So he's worked the tactics out very well. Once again, Grishuk makes a positional move. Just add some pressure. Use the H-pawn. Maybe a file, maybe something. And Nakamura takes the long diagonal, bishop f6. Grishuk trades. Tries to take the open D line, which the rook comes to D7, and Grishuk just trades. Knight takes. We get to the critical position, and they're both getting a little low on time. All right, these are good knights. Somehow these bishops are not so bad, but the white king's very safe. What would you do for the white side? It is defended.
Oh.
There's probably a couple or a few good moves. The computer suggests maybe just get the queen on this long diagonal. You might be able to invade better.
Well, doesn't that threaten no, that he
Okay.
fell over.
So if that were to happen, could he take on B2?
Well, the knight's guarding it.
Well, but the other knight's hanging.
Uh-huh. Okay, that's possible.
But the queen checks on the reaction.
It's complicated. Well, this was the computer's first choice, but I think humans would like the choice that Grishuk made. He says, this is my coffee house move. He goes pawn to h6. Such is that variation you're talking about. When the queen gets here, it'll be checkmate instead. The computer doesn't like this quite as much, but I certainly do. You make it so difficult for your opponent. Just more mates, so many more tactics. And here Nakamura plays not the best. He needs to probably do something like king to g8. Just avoid all the tactics. Maybe get out of that back rank mate quite as much. But he immediately tries to relieve the pressure of these two knights. And here we get to the fun part of the game, the tactical part. Move for the white side. How to beat Nakamura. Now that certainly makes a lot of sense. Jump in, attack the queen. I think he can guard things with the queen to c7. Well, maybe running a little low on time. He threw in the move knight to e5, threats. Also with that, also threats on c5. Which Nakamura thought, oh, that's going to be fine for me. So he just takes it. Okay, excellent, excellent. Don't take back. Now this has tremendous threats. The queen, the bishop with the check, and that pawn is still hanging. And this position is actually lost for the black side. If you're playing Nakamura, though, or when you're playing Nakamura, remember the guy is super tricky, though. So he's lost, but he decides, okay, and you haven't got that much time. You're threatening his queen. He throws in this move.
The fork when you fork is down. Yeah. So queen takes. I think the queen takes. And it takes e8. Or queen takes c5. And it takes d8.
You would do queen 6, c5, queen to d6 or something. What's that? You could, and then maybe bishop checks. That tricky Nakamura. Okay, someone who says, all right, Naka, you're tricky, but there is reality. Well, you could, and maybe bishop takes f4. But if you just say, wait a minute, how about if I just take your queen? And then you have to say, did that really work? It's so easy to be afraid of ghosts. And that's why this is so good. Your opponent says, oh, no, you don't. Then you stop and say, wait a minute, I don't believe you. Okay, Nakamura did his fork, check. King takes the queen, but you win the pawn check. You take the bishop. You've got an extra pawn, much nicer pawns, and then this pass pawn on the queen side. And this is a winning position. Nakamura advances. He's not going to give up. Bishop g4 and knight to d4. And he moved for the white side here. Well, yeah, you see, he's got some last tricks. What he wants to do, of course, is just queen a pawn down here, and and get this one to run. So, okay, some people would fall for this, but Grishuk sees he's got a check here. He first did king to e1, and now this won't work. Push, takes, push, takes, push, but check in here, yes. And that was sort of his last trick to try. And he played king to here, which now threatens that trick. But Grishuk said, okay, I'll get one square closer. And now it's good. So now everything's kind of hanging. It just doesn't work. The threatening pawn there, followed by bishop takes pawn.
There's no way that knight takes e2 works, huh?
Well, there's still a bishop here.
And then check.
He was trying. He was trying.
Trying king takes pawn push, but I didn't see the bishop.
So at this point, there's no way out, and really, king e7, push the knight away, take a second pawn. And 2 pawns up. It's just a matter of technique. It went bishop. Bishop attacks c4, knight a5, bring the king up, check here, decides to save this nice pass pawn on the a file. Yeah, that one hurts, and check, and he wins the G pawn, but yeah, just bishop to D3, and the pawn is queening. Nakamura actually pushed, hoping he gets some pawn, but he took it first with his plan to take in there, and finally Nakamura gave up. And Naka was knocked out of the Grand Prix then. So a powerful performance by Grishuk, the best game I've seen for him in years, and he's leading. He's got the most points towards the candidates tournament, so we'll see him again. He's one of those been around for a long time, and maybe he'll be the next challenger, but he's in with Fabiano and Ding Liren and Ninish Giri probably, so he'll have a lot of competition.
How old is he now, about 40?
Not so old, 35 or 6. He's been around a long time. So, okay, we know Magnus in Scotland and the Ivory Coast. We have a Mark Pinto game. He unfortunately lost it in Iceland, but it was a wild and crazy game. Or we could see a game from the senior championship that was right here. So maybe we'll see that one instead.
Who won that thing?
That we have been through. So a game by the winner. Oh, the other news of the world, the computer championship, LC0 and Stockfish, that's, they've had their 90-game match and somehow, some, well, Stockfish started out ahead, but LC0 is a program that actually is learning while it's playing, so it has taken the lead, and the score is now, it's 53.5 to 46.5.
It's tough to root for a computer, I mean, versus, something that learns,
It's true. Well, it's an artificial intelligence.
Yeah, tough to root against, for the computer against artificial.
Yeah. Well, let's see a human game. One of the important games for the senior championship, Mr. Winslow against Michael Ho, which was which round? The last round game to decide the senior championship. And Elliot had white. Yeah, it's white. So what was the date, about May 20th, or it says, I'm sorry, 19th of May.
This sounds like the senior moment championship.
My birthday was the 16th, and then the next 3 days.
Okay, well. So, a Nimzo Indian. No, excuse me, it starts a Queen's Gambit decline, transposing into a Nimzo Indian.
Actually, is it a Nimzo or that other thing?
With here it would be a Ragozin, but when you play pawn to e3, this is actually a Nimzo Indian, which is what you did. And castles develop. This is the Rubinstein variation.
Or is it? I didn't play 92.
That's all. Rubinstein is with the pawn on e3.
I think of this as the Piatigorsky Cup variation. That's where I first saw it. It was both on the Piatigorsky Cup in the 60s.
Okay.
Endless games.
Well, anyway, very common variation since the 1930s.
Right in there. It's appropriate for a senior.
Yeah, this is a classical Nimzo Indian. Black's got his pawns out attacking the center. The bishop's here. Since it can attack the knight, it influences the center. What is that?
I mean, I know it's not, but what I'm saying is there seems some similarities.
Yes. Yeah, the French, there's always some use of the e-pawn. And okay, well, maybe both sides are playing like a French. Anyway, very, very commonly seen, and pawn to a3 is common. Bishop takes knight is the most common move, but pawn takes d4 is also logical. And you could take the bishop, but then the pawn takes the knight. So Elliott takes the pawn, and instead of capturing, which is also reasonable, he simply retreats to e7. Rook to e1. Again, your classic queen's gambit. Black could take here, and it's also an isolated queen pawn with white having a little better development. Instead, rook to e8 is a little unusual. It's not quite to the point. Okay. Yes, there's various things to do. Pawn to c5 is a very aggressive move. And you're trying to get a bind on these dark squares. So, okay, we get direct commentary from the champion himself. This is a pleasure. Okay, the rook on e1 doing more than the rook on e8 because e5 is well covered. So he advances, I'm sorry, black to move, pawn to b6, trying to break up the wedge. And pawn to b4, trying to hold the wedge, threatening pawn to b5. So you take, and you could take with the b pawn, but it's not very exciting. Taking with the d pawn gives these mobile pawns on the queen side, which can cause a lot of trouble. You're a little worried about the black pawns advancing in the center, but rook on e1 stopping that for now. So white has gotten some edge out of the opening. So Michael plays pawn to a6, just stopping these pawns. Probably good. Rook to b1, and what exactly does black do? Could be various things. Queen to c7. That's played. Maybe threatening e5. Thank you. So Elliott plays bishop to g5, and if pawn to e5, bishop takes knight on f6, followed by knight takes d5. So a developing move, restraining black. Okay, bishop to b7. May as well develop. And queen to d2. Very complicated game here. Maybe it would be best just to develop a rook to the center.
I'd like to play a4 and b5 and push him off the board, but
Oh.
stop that.
Okay. Okay.
He played knight h5, didn't he?
He played knight to h5, trying to exchange, get some of the dark squares.
I wrote that up, but of course you're the only person who can see it.
Okay.
This goes back to two books I read in the 60s. One was Art of Attack by Vukovic, which I recommend to anybody, and that is everybody. It's an excellent book about sort of the, like, and it's still good. It has a whole chapter on bishop takes a7 check, or bishop takes rook pawn check. And unfortunately, you see these things, and you get addicted to them. Like, anytime I can play bishop takes h7 check, I'm going to probably want to try to do it. And it turns out it gets interesting here.
Okay.
I can't do it right now, but I can set it up. And I did.
Wow.
But it turns out I missed something much bigger.
Okay. Well, perhaps the other move works, but we'll see what you did. Pawn to g4.
B5 was just crushing.
Okay.
I mean, I can send a d6.
Okay.
There's a great line where I'm tripled on the b file. His queen's on b8, his bishop's on b7. He has to play both rooks to try to guard his bishop, and I get c6 and it's the right moment. He just falls apart. But this is different.
Okay, let's look what happened in the game. Pawn here, and he plays bishop takes the bishop, which, if anybody has been listening to Elliott, now what is?
Bishop takes h7.
Yes, okay, the intermezzo. He takes your bishop, threatening the queen, but you don't take back. You're threatening the bishop and the knight, but if you take the bishop, the knight moves away. So bishop takes h7 check. And if the king takes, you get to take the bishop with check and then take the knight.
Makes sense. If you place queen up to h5, taking that pawn, I didn't calculate much further, and I felt like I really didn't have to.
No, you can't go running with the king up the board. That would be suicidal.
King h6, or king g6, pawn takes my check. King takes pawn. You know there's a mate there somewhere, you just have to get around to finding it. It turns out to be.
Okay, we won't go running up. I like Michael's choice. He says, okay.
Oh, we didn't take it all, right?
He didn't take it all. He just said, you've got that 1h pawn, but I can live with it, and maybe your king side's a little weakened.
Is that the direction you went?
He did king to h8, queen takes,
The last second, only take one piece.
queen takes the bishop, and knight retreats. So at least the black king's kind of safe. You still have the center, and he hasn't.
Elliot, did you see this possibility in a game where you could play like maybe knight f4? You could play knight f4, threaten knight h3, working the king and queen.
There's something fishy about that, like king h4.
I'm just throwing it out there.
It was quite a threat, but you get to defend and give a counter threat.
Couldn't went that big.
Which is why maybe king f8 is better.
Yeah. King f8 might have left that knight to live.
So anyway, play knight f8.
Knight f6, and the bishop has to run away. Well, the knight would take the bishop then. Okay, let's see. Queen here. Oh, yes. Okay. That's a very good question.
Yeah, queen f4.
Yes, it's funny that it's not the discovered check isn't so bad. There's no checkmate on h7. So queen f4 threatens that.
Yeah, but knight g5 could be
Yeah, but then he has queen takes g4 and check.
oh, yeah, that.
Check.
That's the problem. Very well.
This is sticky.
Yeah, unnecessary.
I lost my will to,
Okay, very complicated game. Lots of attacking possibilities. So Elliot simply retreated. Queen's on g5. Simply retreat, bishop to c2, and king came back. Pawn to h3. Okay. But both sides centralize their rooks. Very logical. And yeah, he decided he's a pawn down, advance those center pawns.
if I remember correctly, I gave that as dubious without any alternative.
Okay.
But I don't remember what he did here.
Well, it's very complicated with this. I mean, it looks aggressive. Rook's in the center, the bishop, the two knights. It's compelling to do pawn to e5. And maybe afterwards the computer suggested the queen can go there and pawn to g5. Okay, maybe a computer can find this. Your move, knight to h4, looks very logical. So, but the knight jumped into d4. A centralized knight for a knight on the rim, stopping that. Well, this knight can take on f5. It's a good defender.
Not to mention knight f3 check, so.
Oh, you're saying, playing rook takes on
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Rook takes c4 is interesting.
Very complicated. I don't quite trust this. I think we will go to the game. Bishop moved out of take, threatening the rook. And kind of like this move, chase the queen away, so you won't get checkmated. Now Elliot retreated. Do you think queen d2 is better so the pawn can come to f4? But you went to c1, a little further out of the way. And the rook and take came up to e6. Very sharp game. I like the way that Michael's played. All the pieces are moving. They're centralized. They're in the action. And this is kind of a good move. The knight's on the rim here, but it's got possibilities. But this square is weak. So rook to d3 was played, which is a good defensive move. Just covering some more squares. And now exactly what to do? Well, you suggest rook to h6, probably a good move. But queen e7 was played, hitting the knight on h4. And knight jumped into f5. So it was a trade, the centralized knight for the knight on the rim. And the rook is attacked, so comes to h3. Sorry, h6. And a pawn down for black, but good pawns, good possibility of a bishop, the knight, the rook. Very tense until the next move. And came a great move. So if you want to win the senior championship or junior championship, white to move. You need some move that attacks, defends. Could play c6. Can we just take it? Maybe.
So take it with what, the bishop?
Pawn to c6 is. I did not run that through the computer. Have you got a suggestion, Ellie?
Well, what I did does something interesting. Is rook on h6?
Rook is on h6.
If I can limit its possibilities, then c6 will be better.
Rook g3 threatens queen takes h6.
Also, rook g3 is another move.
I don't know what the problem is with rook g3. That was an interesting idea.
Did you sack the pawn? No.
Maybe queen to h4. Queen h4 might be a good move.
Abandons the pawn at e5.
But I like what I played.
Yeah, that's.
By the way, it jumped on the move that I played.
Well, there seems to be other possibilities here. But with time running down, queen to f4.
Inspired by Tony Robbins' Mason.
Yes, if one sees Tony's problems, you put the pieces where you think they shouldn't go. And there, you put the queen where the pawn can take it. But this would be just a terrible endgame. You'd have these queenside pawns, rook on the 7th, and there's no attack for black. So hitting the key e5 point just puts black under tremendous pressure. And so he did pawn to e4, and now came the other suggestion that you made. Look, Jason, no, you did pawn to c6. The rook's attacked, but you're not worried. But this pawn you would love to get. So the last two moves have just hit black in the center where it really hurts. And with that, that just turns the tide. Really nothing to do. Bishop takes, rook takes, knight takes d5 on the queen. Queen to d6. Okay, he did queen takes pawn, taking the pawn. There's checks and things. And he did king to f8. And one more move, and he gave up. Knight to f4. Yes, just opening it up. Queen e7 check is happening. Or if queen c7, rook takes, and queen takes c6. So, with that move, Elliott became Cal State senior champion.
Is that Northern California or the whole state?
Northern California is considered its own state.
And behind Nick, Sammy has arrived, our under 16 champion, 1600 champion. Okay, thank you all. Good luck tonight.